Joined now by a team of legal experts to break this all down. I've got our Justice and Intelligence correspondent, Ken Dilanian, NBC News legal analyst, Danny Cevallos, and the former chief of the Department of Justice's Counterintelligence section, David Laufman. Ken, let me start with you and what we learned here. And I think that I look at it this way for you. Tell me the 2 or 3 pieces of information you got from this that really help clarify for you why this search warrant was executed.
You used the term fuller portrait. I think that's apt here. So one, a number of different civilian witnesses, not one informant as had been portrayed, one specific confidential human source. They're talking to a lot of people.
When they say civilian, I don't mean to interrupt you, but since you're here in person, I can do it easily. Civilian doesn't mean government, or does that, when they say civilian, do they mean not in government?
I read it to mean non-secret service, because who else could we be talking about?
That's what I read it as non-secret service, but I was then, does that also mean non-government?
Perhaps. Yeah. I mean, because we're talking about people who work at Mar-a-Lago, potentially people around Donald Trump. So but that's a big deal. That added to the picture of what this is. And then also, the classification markings, these are markings that I just have never seen on documents that are outside of a SCIF, a special room to house these kind of things, because we're talking about documents that betray potentially CIA human sources, signals intelligence, intercepts of foreign leader communications, the most sensitive kinds of documents. And when you take this and put on top of it our reporting that we got from John Bolton and other people that Donald Trump liked to grab stuff from his presidential intelligence briefings, and they never knew what happened to it. Well, it seems like some of it ended up here. I mean, we have this interesting line from an archives email that says that this stuff was intermingled with newspapers, magazines, printed news articles, photos, miscellaneous printouts, notes, and a lot of classified records, which they were unfolded, intermixed with other records, and otherwise improperly identified. So it feels like that he just stuffed a lot of stuff into boxes and ended up in his house. And people have gone to prison for that over the years.
Well, and I want you to clarify that. And this is where a real question I have. If they simply wanted to make a case that he mishandled classified information, what more evidence do they need?
I mean, well, I think they need evidence that he supervised or caused to be packed these boxes, that he actually physically himself took these records, that he reviewed them, that he knew they were there, that he had the criminal intent. Because that's the other interesting thing. Included in this document is a letter from his lawyer, Evan Corcoran, that says, first of all, the president can declassify anything, and secondly, none of these laws apply to the president. And obviously that's highly debatable, but that's their legal defense. But it also goes to, if lawyers are telling him that, then can he argue, well, look, I didn't have any criminal intent. They told me I could take this stuff. I was the president.
Danny Cevallos, I want to present that same question to you. If the government simply wanted to make a case of mishandling a classified information, illegally done so, what more evidence do they need? And I say this because we've had people who've simply been caught with classified information in their basement go to prison for years, not months, years.
That's the catch. You can make out the prima facie elements of these federal crimes, essentially that there were documents, they were in the possession of the government, they were no longer in the possession of the government. Here's where we found them. That'll give you the elements of some of the federal crimes that are alleged in the search warrant application, the affidavit of probable cause. But that's not the end of the inquiry, and Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, knows that just because you have a prima facie case doesn't mean you have a case. There are possible defenses. Relying on the advice of counsel is one. The fact that the potential defendant could be the president, and therefore maybe that ability to declassify documents, maybe not a perfect defense, but it's a defense that would be raised. And finally, who exactly ordered the documents to be removed? Ken Dilanian pointed this one out just before me. That's an important issue. Was it a direct order from the former president, or was it one of his minions? And if so, does that create a buffer of liability between the president and whoever ultimately packed up these documents? So a lot of thorny issues that don't make this a slam dunk, even if you feel that you have all of the essential elements on the front end.
Well, let me follow up with you this way, Danny. If this simply was about mishandling classified information, it's pretty clear that's not the investigation they're pursuing, correct?
at least according to the statutes that are cited. I mean, and that's a helpful thing that was unredacted, but something that anybody has access to, which is the statutes that are being investigated. And of course, you have potentially the Espionage Act. You have potentially the standard federal statute that deals with removing documents from the government. But, I mean, this could be an investigation into additional things, and it obviously is sensitive because most of this affidavit of probable cause was completely blacked out. Yes, they gave us some of the basics, some of the things we expected on the front end,
right,
but the entire back end of this affidavit is completely redacted. So we don't know what direction that investigation is in. And even if you have those documents in the possession of the former president, or F. POTUS, as he's referred to in the affidavit, that doesn't necessarily mean that these criminal statutes have been violated. The only thing the affidavit of probable cause indicates is that there's probable cause, the lowest criminal standard, that there's evidence of a crime at a location, not a
right,
person that committed it, but at a location.
All right, David Laufman, I would like you to explain, and look, I understand protocol, longstanding tradition, all of those things. But given what came out today that we essentially in the news media forced the Justice Department to do, is there anything that was released publicly that you think the American public should not know?
Should something that was released to the American public should not know? No, yeah. I think they took a reasonable course in allowing the release of material that was not truly going to undermine the government's investigation. They didn't even identify, the law enforcement agent or do so in a way that could have compromised him. So to me, this was a reasonable threading of the needle to effect a compromise between the need for public access to information and protecting the integrity of the ongoing investigation. But if I can just, respond to something Danny said, yes, it's true. There's a considerable distance to travel between probable cause and beyond a reasonable doubt. Having said that, it looks to me like the government is well on its way to meeting its burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The volume of classified information, the fact that it's in the president's residence, evidence that ties it to him personally. They also spent a considerable amount of time trying to knock down, it seemed to me, this notion that he could declassify stuff just by virtue of being the president or former president. And all this is redacted after the reference to Kash Patel claiming that he has this authority to declassify everything. But the reason that's all, I think, declassified is because they're knocking it down. Now they're knocking it down. And I think they're all in trying to prove at a minimum a potential 793E case under the Espionage Act and possibly obstruction as well.
David, I think in hindsight, the Justice Department's reputation, our sort of era of misinformation, would have been better served had what was released today been proactively released. Like I said, I understand we've lived in a world where everybody respected norms. We had former presidents that respected norms. We live in a different world now. We've decided that we're going to release some intelligence because we're dealing with a Vladimir Putin who will weaponize information vacuums and misinformation. Is there any lesson to be learned here at how to deal with high-profile cases like this now?
Chuck, the lesson to be learned is to let the Department of Justice and the FBI do their work professionally under court supervision when necessary, without being buffeted by this carnival-like atmosphere that surrounds it. I don't mean the media being that buffeting atmosphere, but the president and his minions, right, to use someone else's word. Let them do their job. They're doing it methodically. They're doing it with the same meticulous, painstaking attention to detail and with reverence to the rule of law and enforcement policy and judicial precedent that will have to be brought to bear. At the end of the day, there's going to have to be prudential considerations that the Attorney General takes into account as to whether or not to, in fact, charge if the evidence is there. Yeah. All this takes time. Remember, Jay Bratt, my successor, told the court last week that the government is still in the initial stages of its investigation. So it would be premature for them to make decisions until they've actually completed their investigation.
Let's talk about the investigation. Let me start with you, David. 15 months. Is it fair to say that it looks to me as if the government, both archives and justice, gave the former president every chance in the world to cooperate on his own? Every chance in the world. And it's almost like they said, okay, let's see what he gives back to us. All right, well, he gave us some stuff, but we know he didn't give us everything. It seems like that, I'm not saying the government set the trap. It's almost like the former president created his own because he would just piecemeal cooperated.
It's a little bit of both. I mean, yes, the president, through his own actions, created the jeopardy that he's in. At the same time, the government gave him every chance and more to come into compliance, to effect the full return of all classified information. Ultimately, or at least initially, that's what the FBI and the department want to get. They want to recover from the wild classified information that is at risk. And, hard to know behind the scenes what those conversations were with Trump's lawyers. But I also think the government wanted to build a record, the same kind of record made public today, that they could not have been more reasonable. They could not have been more patient before escalating up in gradients. And remember, in May, they issued a search warrant. They issued a search warrant for classified information.
Right.
And even then, in the midst of compulsory process, the Trump people stonewalled. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, Danny Cevallos, how much more jeopardy have they put themselves in when you see how many chances they had to, like I said, I mean, they had every chance in the world to essentially return the stolen goods. Are you sure? It's sort of like somebody caught shoplifting. You sure you don't have it? And he didn't do it. How much more legal jeopardy does that create?
I think in looking at this affidavit of probable cause, one of DOJ's missions in redacting it was, let's redact everything that's sensitive, but let's try to push out there every opportunity that Trump and his team had to give up these documents. And so it's no surprise that they relied on anything that may have been publicly reported we see in that affidavit of probable cause, because I think that's the messaging DOJ wants to get out. They don't want to reveal their investigative process, but they would love to reveal and push out the idea that Trump had numerous opportunities to give back these documents, and that essentially the search warrant was required, was a necessity, because they tried everything else they could. They tried letters, they tried subpoenas, they tried all kinds of different things. And it wouldn't be a surprise to me if some of those blacked out areas of the affidavit of probable cause, maybe people from inside the Trump circle saying, hey, I'm being made to say we've turned over these documents, and we haven't turned over these documents. That is a possibility. We may never know.
Ken, a couple things for your beat. Number one, I've heard, I know Marco Rubio, as Senate Intelligence Committee chair, says, hey, we should see what was taken. Now that there is a redacted version that exists, and we all know this, do you expect Justice to do that?
To provide it to Congress? No. Their position
even in a skiff, even in only the Gang of Eight?
Their position is that this is a criminal investigation. Congress has no right to this information. Now, but doesn't the intelligence community have these records, and aren't they going through it? And then those people have an oversight responsibility to provide information to the Gang of Eight and to the chairman of the Intelligence Committee. So that's how the committees might get it. Right now, they're asking the Biden administration to conduct a formal damage assessment. And when Courtney Kube, Carol Lee, and I started asking around, isn't there one already? The answer we got was no. And it's very curious. It almost seems like the Biden administration doesn't want to touch this thing.
What's the next? Is it possible we may now go months without an update in this investigation publicly?
It's possible, because it depends on whether they view this as too close to an election to act on Trump, or whether that's not relevant because Trump's not on the ballot. If they take the latter view, if they say, then I think we could see some developments, because as David said, they are really at the beginning of their investigation. Right. There are a lot of people they still need to talk to establish what Trump did here.
I have a feeling today's the last headline. Perhaps, I say this, and who the heck knows, but perhaps for this investigation. As we know, there are multiple that we're following.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.